Bob Eichen here. That's a long title, but that's basically what I'm going to talk about today: fate and transport and residential systems. And obviously the sponsors are Cornell, Shree's up here, and New York State PPI, and then the Chautauqua Lake Management Committee. I was here 4 months ago, and did enhanced treatment units, so a little familiar to what goes on here. So I'm going to talk about phosphorus and residential systems. Then I'm going to talk about what phosphorus reduction capability a conventional system has. And then I'm going to talk about two systems. A lot of people talk about things that they can do from a treatment standpoint, but until you start seeing hard numbers, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. These two systems that I'm going to talk about up here both have the proven capability to reduce phosphorus in residential on-site septic systems by north of 90%. Actually, they probably average somewhere between 95 and 98%. I'll also talk about two other systems that are getting looked at to talk about a 50% reduction. Then I don't know whether we'll take time for questions or we'll do it as part of the panel, whatever is easiest. Okay, when nutrients become a problem, I mean, nutrients are a good thing, but just like many other things in life, when they get in excess, that's when we create problems. So you got nitrogen and phosphorus are essential nutrients for plant growth. We all know that. But when excessive levels enter the water, there's an increase in plant growth, which leads to a lowered recreational use, eventual oxygen deprivation, and that oxygen deprivation basically impacts aquatic animal life and upsets the whole ecology of the lake. Nitrogen is a significant problem for salt water. Phosphorus is a significant problem for fresh water. That's not to say nitrogen is not a problem in fresh water, but basically nitrogen goes really crazy in salt water. Phosphorus goes really crazy in fresh water. Is Jeff still here somewhere? He was sitting up here. There he is. Jeff did a great job talking about percentages. Phosphorus from on-site wastewater treatment systems. Let me just say this. Septic systems, on-site wastewater treatment systems, OWTS, on-site systems, all the same thing. Okay, we're all talking about the same thing. Is a small component of the total phosphorus load. I think you said, Jeff, 2 to 4% if you were looking to revise your numbers. Yeah, so I mean, it's a small percent. Here's the kicker. Phosphorus from on-site wastewater treatment systems is a major concern for lakeshore communities because it comes in a soluble form that the algae loves to consume. And it comes, lakeshore communities, obviously you guys get busier and busier as the summer season comes into play. So you got kind of a perfect storm. If you ever remember that movie with the sword fisherman going out of Gloucester, everything happened, it creates this big storm. The perfect storm here is you've got phosphorus being a small component, but the phosphorus that comes out is absolutely the favorite food for algae, and it comes out at a time when you guys are pumping all kinds of phosphorus into your septic systems, which is going out. So it creates that what I call a perfect storm. Even though phosphorus is a small percentage, that phosphorus is great food for the algae, and it's coming at a time when that algae is ready to grow like crazy. So it's kind of a perfect storm in that regard. The EPA has been dancing around phosphorus for a while. Okay. To the best of my research, 2014, 2015, you'll see some national EPA phosphorus reducing levels come out. But in 2002, the EPA made an obvious observation that those of you who live here in Chautauqua Lake don't need us to make, and that is that older on-site systems pose a potential serious environmental degradation as witnessed by the thousands of inland lakes around the U.S. where on-site development is increasingly being cited as the primary reason for lake eutrophication. Here's the key point, and I'm going to make this again later. Older on-site systems. I think if you went around the lake and started looking, which I know Bill was saying you guys had a septic system inspection class and training going on this week, but really the biggest issue that I see when you start looking at residential systems is what kind of systems are you looking at? Cesspools, seepage pits, septic tanks, undersized septic tanks, direct discharge into a ditch, direct discharge into a lake. You'd be amazed at what's in the ground sometimes. We were at Canandaigua Lake 3 weeks ago. This very nice gentleman, he was probably 80 years old. He comes up to me, he says, "Can you help me? I listened to your presentation, can you help me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd be happy to try." He said, "I can't find my septic system." I said, "How long have you been in your house?" He said, 10 years. I said, you get out in the basement?" He said, "I don't have a basement." I said, "Okay." So I told him basically how to find it, but I know what he's going to find. He's going to find an old metal tank. He's going to find a 55 barrel drum. Maybe he'll find, a 500-gallon old concrete tank. That's where we really get into this problem is the older systems. And as we've already talked about eutrophication, it's best reflected. You see it with the algae and the plant growth, and you see it with the diminished water clarity. Sorry that the print's a little small here. As has been talked about already, what's the primary source of phosphorus in a septic tank? I just want to say human waste. I could have said urine and feces. I think somebody said urine, and that's correct. About 37% of it's urine. Tom, 23% of it is from feces, but the vast majority is human waste. It's what we consume. Detergents and garbage disposals historically were a very big problem, but as we've already talked about too, laundry soap, is almost phosphate-free now, so that's been a big plus. Dishwasher detergent can be almost phosphate-free. That's a big plus. So the amount of phosphorus coming from detergents is going down. I can't say that anybody's actually studied that and looked at the percentage drop, but given the fact that they're regulating it aggressively, certainly makes sense. And then garbage disposals. If you've got a garbage disposal and you're sending that into your septic tank, it's almost undigested human waste, isn't it? So, I mean, that's a very big source of phosphorus, too. Not a big player with garbage disposals. They're terrible for septic systems. All right, I talked about the fact that laundry and dishwasher soap regulated. A conventional on-site septic system, and let me define that. It's a septic tank to a distribution box to some leach field. We call them dispersal fields, drain fields, leach fields, whatever you want to call it. That's a conventional system. Primary treatment happens in the septic tank. I think Tom talked about primary treatment in the 70s. From a central treatment plant standpoint, you use the 60% number, 50, 60% is the numbers we usually give. But let's talk phosphorus. 20 to 30% of the phosphorus is reduced in the septic tank in a residential system. And where does that go? It basically goes with the settled solids in the bottom. That's where that phosphorus goes. Dispersal field, leach field reductions from phosphorus depend on a whole bunch of factors. So it's very hard to say X% happens in a leach field. If somebody says that to you, I would really like to look at their data. And they may have good data, but a lot of people make generalizations with that. Usually what is said with a conventional system is when all is said and done, after the drain field, phosphorus has been reduced somewhere between 75 and 85%. Primary tank, in the if it's a soil-based dispersal field, in the soils. That's usually a reasonable number to look at. Okay? The amount of phosphorus reduction in dispersal fields, this is where it gets complicated. It depends on the effluent organic strength. What are you putting in your septic tank? It depends on pH. When I talk about one of the proprietary systems coming up, the whole issue of balancing the pH, the alkalinity, and the acid is a big issue. Ion concentrations, soil mineralogy and chemistry, and groundwater flow. Here's something you may not think about. If you have a conventional system, 20 to 30% of that phosphorus settles out in the tank. Let's say somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% reduction occurs in the drain field, the leach field. Do you know that most of that occurs within 2, 3, 4, 5 meters or yards of the start of that drain field? That's because good soils, and even bad soils like clay, bind and grab phosphorus very aggressively. So you'll see most of your phosphorus reduction will be in the first parts of that drain field. I've mentioned this point already down here. Average type and age of on-site systems, major factor in the amount of phosphorus pollution. You guys are taking, a watershed approach. You're taking a very intelligent, proactive look at things. upgrading and replacing a lot of these old failing systems that basically they're not providing any treatment. They're not, some of them aren't providing even primary treatment, is a great place to start to reduce phosphorus as well. Okay, you're going to see on these slides coming up, confidential on the bottom. I wouldn't be presenting it to you if it was still confidential. But the entrepreneur who started this company, Alexandra Drizzo, Dr. Drizzo, she is paranoid that somebody is going to take her 20 years of research and great ideas and do something with it. And if I put 20 years of great ideas and research into it, I'd feel the same way she did. But when you see confidential, we have Dr. Drizzo's permission to do this. She was a professor at the University of Vermont, and we'll talk a little bit about her company. There's two I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about phosphoreduc. I call it reduce, she calls it reduc. It's her company. Then we're going to talk about phosphrid, which is from Lombardo Associates, a very well-known engineer named Pio Lombardo, who developed that system in conjunction with the University of Waterloo in Canada. Both these systems, the reason we're looking at them, can reduce phosphorus in a residential system as part of the treatment train by north of 90%. And as I said earlier, you'll see numbers 95, 98%. There's some other issues with treating phosphorus in a residential system, which we'll talk about too. But there's a lot of people out there who say they can do it. These two folks have proven that they can do it, and that's why we're going to look at them. Okay, Dr. Drizzo has tested her system extensively overseas to start, because it's easier to do it overseas than it is in the U.S. So she's just looking, she's saying, you want to talk phosphorus pollution? Let's talk phosphorus pollution. Here's China, here's Vermont, and here's Brazil, where she just came back a month ago. It's a global problem, and it's creating huge problems for freshwater all around the world. Algae blooms decrease oxygen levels in the water, resulting in fish kills, reduced biodiversity, foul odors, taste, diminished recreational appeal. You guys know all these things. Absolutely, scare people to death in terms of using the water as a drinking water supply. Some species have even been found to release chemicals that are toxic to animals and humans. I know that's been a concern here with the blue-green algae toxin. I'm going to stay away from this because I'm not a scientist, but I'm going to focus on this. 1 gram of phosphate phosphorus promotes the growth of up to 100 grams of algae. So remember when we talked before that the kind of phosphorus that comes out of septic systems is absolutely the food that the algae is waiting for, and it's coming at them in larger quantities at a time when the algae is really geared up and ready to go, the warm months. That's why you see things like 1 gram of phosphate phosphorus can create 100 grams of algae. That's really what we're talking about there. 762 areas worldwide experiencing severe symptoms of eutrophication. Coastal surveys of the U.S. and Europe, 78% of the assessed continental U.S. coast, 65% for Europe. And then she makes the point in red that the actual magnitude of the problem is much greater because many regions are just starting to research. I would say there's a second part to that. I have a love-hate relationship with the EPA. A lot of things that they do are terrific. Sometimes it can be very difficult to get things done. But if you look at some of these other countries, and these are all rapidly emerging economies, their regulation there is, it's a hit and a miss at best. So, the percentages you'll see from these areas, in my opinion, is going to be much higher because the regulation there is so spotty, lax, or not enforced. 2013 survey by the EPA, more than half of our nation's rivers and stream miles are in poor condition. A lot of that from excess nutrients. 27% excessive levels of nitrogen, 40% high levels of phosphorus. So what are we going to do about it? Okay. Phosphoreduc uses iron and calcium-based filtration materials. Okay. You'll hear a few things talked about when people. Tom, I think you mentioned a chemical addition into the central treatment plant. We're going to be talking about a lot of the same things: steel slag, aluminum, calcium, iron. These are the same kind of things that are used in central treatment plants to drive phosphorus percentages way down low. A lot of that is now being packaged intelligently for residential systems. But that's really what happens. When you have phosphorus in wastewater, nitrogen you want to nitrify to denitrify so that the nitrogen gas goes off in the air. That's a home run. Doesn't work that way with phosphorus. Phosphorus, you have to bind it, catch it, keep it, and hold it. Then eventually your media is going to have to be replaced because you've maximized how much you can bind, keep, and hold. And that's really the issue that you'll see with these systems, is eventually that media is going to need to be replaced. What Dr. Drizzo talks about here, she can customize and scale up to address almost any water or wastewater pollution problem. These are filtered beds. These are torpedoes. Agriculture, I know we're in a heavily agricultural area in New York State for a great deal of it. She's made a lot of her bread and butter by dealing with agricultural runoff and phosphorus in Vermont. We all know what they do in Vermont. They're dairy farms. So that's been a big part of her solution. So agriculture, wastewater, residential, commercial, and upgrades to central treatment plants. Tom, might be something to think about. And then urban stormwater, a very good product. Her media capability, her filtration capability is very good for stormwater runoff. Now, we've been talking to and dealing and helping Dr. Drizzo for about 6 months. What we're helping her do is get approvals in New York State for her systems. Why? We need solutions, right? We need affordable solutions, okay? She has a U.S. patent that she just got this year for phosphorus removal for residential, municipal, and commercial wastewater. She fits in each category. Then she's got down here state approvals, agricultural effluent runoff treatment. Vermont, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. 2011 filed, completed 2012. Phosphorus technologies for removal from septic systems. Virginia and Vermont, filed 2011, obtained 2012. We've taken a lot of that documentation for her and presented that to the DEC, to the New York State Department of Health, and we're also looking to put some pilots in the ground in the New York City watershed, so we have to deal with New York City DEP. There's one missing here, and that's North Carolina. She's got residential system going in North Carolina this month. Well, actually, you'll see this in the next chart, but North Carolina doesn't require a statewide permit to do that. It just requires a PE, a professional engineer, licensed in the state to design it. The other thing that she did is she got Canadian federal approvals for her system, which is not easy to do. You know, we might look, it's Canada. It's not easy to do up there. So that's the path she's taking, where she's now working hard to get residential systems and pilots in the ground. Vermont, June. North Carolina, May should be added in there, and Virginia is July. These are filter beds that she's got installed in tanks in the ground. Basically, a treatment train is probably the easiest way to explain this. So in a residential wastewater or septic system treatment train, you got the outlet pipe coming out of the house to a septic tank, which is primary treatment. This could be a secondary treatment unit, what are called enhanced treatments or units or alternative treatments. In this case, it's her system in either a 500 or 1,000 gallon tank, and that tank is full of this media, this calcium and iron-based media that takes out north of 90% of the phosphorus. Then it goes off to some kind of a drain field. So the treatment train for her, septic tank primary, phosphoreduct tank to reduce phosphorus. Her system also reduces BOD, biological oxygen demand, and total suspended solids to a point where it's very close, if not can meet NSF 40 standards for a 30 and 30, which is less than 30 parts per million total suspended solids and 30 parts per million on BOD. She can almost meet that, but she's an entrepreneur. You think she's going to spend $150,000 the National Sanitation Foundation up front to do that? She's not going to do that. What she's doing instead is getting states approval to put pilots in the ground and test them like crazy. But that's the treatment train. So you have a septic tank, you have the phosphoreduct tank, and then you go out to a regular drain field. And as you can see, her whole process is speeding up very quickly. These systems are going in the ground. We've got a chance to put 1 or 2 of these in the ground in New York State yet this year, if I want to go with my optimistic scenario. This is just a quick diagram of what her system looks like. Here's a tank. You got phosphoreduct media in here, phosphoreduct media in here, and this is a proprietary media, which I can't really talk a lot about, that maintains the balance of pH. Because a lot of people who said they could reduce phosphorus got in trouble because their pH got out of whack, and they really couldn't maintain the kind of treatment levels that they said they could. She's figured out a way to do that, and she includes that media right in the treatment of her tank. Okay, here's where it gets a little tricky. Media life and disposal options. Initially, when we were talking, she said, oh, you know what? Just have the pumper come and they'll pump all that out, you know, every 5 years or 7 years or 8 years, and you'll be good to go. I said, there isn't a pumper alive that's going to pump out, you know, the kind of media, filtered media material that's in there with their pump tank. If they had a turbo tank, they might do that, but we said that's not going to happen. So basically what we're looking at here, 5 to 7 year minimum life for the media to maintain greater than 90% phosphorus reduction. She talks about years that are higher than this based on experience internationally, but she's conservative, so she posts what she's going to post. And she's basically saying, you know, just dispose of it like you would any other wastewater material at, you know, at a landfill or at a dump site for first installations. She, however, points out that filter material has great potential for reuse as a phosphorus-rich soil amendment and or commodity fertilizer. So there's likely going to be an economic source for that, but that's not going to be the issue to start. So the big issue with this media is how long does it last, and then how much is it to replace it, okay? Before I go to the next one. Installed in multiple sites over a same time frame, you do a neighborhood, you do a community, whatever the case may be, less than $5,000, actually less than $4,000 per install for the phosphoreduct technology. Then the question is, which I saw some eyebrows come up, that's why we're looking at this system and trying to help her get it approved and installed in New York State. Then the issue is what's the media life and what do you do with it? So again, 5 to 7 year minimum, likely to be a little higher than that. And when you dispose of it, you're just going to buy another bag of media, of filtration media from phosphoreduct, put it in, you're good to go for whatever the next time period is. Now, the next system has been around, is the longest of any with proven data, okay? Lombardo Associates out of Bedford, Massachusetts. Pio Lombardo is probably one of the top decentralized wastewater engineers in the country. I mean, I want to give credit where credit's due. Pio is nationally recognized for his expertise and skill. And I'm going to talk about 3 systems he's done. They tested at the Massachusetts Barnstable County septic study area. They tested there. He's got a residential system installed in Nantucket, and then he's got an office building installed, notice, Ulster County, New York. So we've got one in New York. Now, Pio's system, here's the treatment train for Pio's. Wastewater flow coming out of the house, primary treatment septic tank to a phosphorid system. Now, what's the phosphorid system? It's, again, filtration media that removes phosphorus from water through a reductive iron dissolution and mineralization process. Binding up the phosphorus, capturing the phosphorus, not letting it out of that tank. And then he's got here, it goes to soil dispersal. It can also go to a sand filter for polishing. Okay? I know you guys have probably done a lot around here with sand filters. So this first thing is the Massachusetts Septic Test System at Otis Air Force Base. 330 gallons a day is the design flow. It's a septic tank to a phosphorus filter to a leaching system. And let's see, influent to the RID, total phosphorus. Average was 5.7 parts per million, 94% reduction because he took it down to 0.4. You guys are worrying about getting to 2 to start, right? And then down to 0.2. Some of these systems on the residential end are going to get below 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1. You'll see that. Now, in addition to that, Pio's system also reduces nitrogen, which is a nice combination there. Knocks it out by 54%, and then it also reduces BOD by about 86%. So that's one advantage that Phosphorid has over phosphoreduct is it also does a good job, not a great job, but a good job on nitrogen reduction. Okay, so that's system number 1. And this is just to show you some of those percentages up here. 100% up here. Here's his reducing capability. It's a good system. It works. If you Google Phosrid, you'll go to Lombardo. If you Google PhosX, it'll take you up to Canada, but PhosX is Phosrid. PO's the exclusive distributor for it in the United States, and he helped the University of Waterloo develop that. PhosX, Phosrid, same system. Okay. Then this is a residential that he did. There's actually two of them. 440-gallon site and 330-gallon site. Septic tank, phosphorus media filter, and a polishing filter, which was really a sand filter, small one. And the numbers that you'll see here, let's see, site number 1, very easier for me to read it here. It's not very clear. Site number 1, 98% removal. You notice it was only over a summer period, but 98%. Site number 2, over 98%. Site number 3, over 99%. His system works. It's a little pricey. Now, one of the things I always look at, just from a purely business point of view, is there's a lot of people starting to get in this game. The interesting thing with Phosrid, there aren't very many of them installed out there. I've argued with PO in a nice way, because it's his system. It's a catch-22. You're pricing it too high. His pricing tends to be somewhere 9 or 10,000 up to about 15,000 for a 3 or 4 bedroom, versus what Phosphoreduc is going to talk about at a much lower cost. Now, PO also throws in the added benefit of nitrogen reduction. So food for thought on both systems, and I think you'll see a lot of interest in both of them. This is the New York install he's got at Central Hudson Gas. It was put in 2008, 2,500 gallons a day. The influent phosphorus was 17. It was very high. The effluent phosphorus is 1.6. Now, if we're talking tertiary treatment standards, 1.6 is, it's okay, not a great number. Meets the 2, but it's not a great number. And I suspect PO's probably done some things to beef up that number. But that's a 90% reduction. So, I mean, usually the average influent, phosphorus influent residential, it's anywhere, I don't know, 6 to 12, 6 to 14 parts per million. This is 17 to start, which probably explains. But he took 90% of it out. It's pretty darn good. That could meet the treatment standards you're being asked to meet pre-Speedies right now. Okay, 2 other systems. Anybody hear the White Knight treatment system? Okay. White Knights are very, very, very effective and very popular aerobic treatment with adding bacteria and biology for high-strength effluent. Very common system when you're dealing with restaurants. In a lot of instances, you want to knock down the strength of that effluent significantly before it goes out to the drain field. So Knight Treatment Systems has something called the White Knight. Well, they also have something called the NERD, which is a nutrient removal system. They have high hopes for this, but their claim of an average of 50% isn't going to play well as people get more and more watershed management plans in place. You're not going to be satisfied with a 50% reduction in phosphorus. So I think they've got to take a more serious look at that. But it's gravity flow. It's a proprietary media. Again, iron, calcium, alum. Everybody's got their own different mix, and it binds up that phosphorus. Now, Otsego Lake, SUNY Oneonta, their biological field station, tested these systems. If you go to Shree's website, to Cornell, and you look at Holly Waterfield's presentation, April 20th, I think it's Richfield Springs we called it, Shree, you'll see some talk about that, but nobody was willing to give me too specific a numbers, which means it's a work in process, and it's not quite baked and ready to go. PhosTech is a system I looked at. Greenwood Lake, which borders New York and New Jersey, they took 5-gallon buckets, and they took an Orenco Advantex tub, and they put 12 5-gallon buckets of their special mineral media mix, and their goal is 50 to 90% reduction, which is a pretty wide range. They don't have any published data yet. Summer 2011, they put it in. They put it in at a church that I saw. and they also put it in a residential, so hopefully we'll see some refreshment come out of that. That was funded by Senator Schumer through the EPA, Orange County, and then NYSERDA, because they were looking for passive systems low on the energy use. And that was done primarily by Stone Environmental. The technology there was something called FOSTEC. Now FOSTEC is coming in these buckets. Not very elegant solution, but if it works, who cares? Because you can take those buckets out, take them, dump them where you need to dump them, fill them back up. That's not too hard to do. But WTI Vermont, I'm not sure what they're doing going forward. So I don't know if somebody's going to pick that up or not. So I'm not recommending this. I'm telling you it's out there. I'm not recommending this. I'm telling you it's out there. But if you said, would you recommend White Knight systems by the same company, I'd say absolutely. They're absolutely terrific for high-strength effluent. Okay, I'm going to compare 4 different septic system management programs for lakeshore communities. One of those is Chautauqua County's. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the department. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. I think I can save a little time. Talk about our current health department program, and then compare 3 management programs from the Finger Lakes, actually 2 from the Finger Lakes and 1 from a lake nearby. Take a close look at septic systems around Chautauqua Lake. And as I'm going through this, and I'm presenting the different models that are used elsewhere, I'd like you to think about what might we learn from those models and what might we be able to use here that would work. So why are we doing this? You know, water's life. It's around the lake. It's very important to us. But we have some problems, as I think Jeff had some good slides of blue-green algae, and these are all from Chautauqua Lake. This is not, but this is from our county. You know, we obviously have problems. This is 2011, and they're creating public health problems. Also, we have sedimentation issues as well, and we can't forget bacteria. George, I think, drove home the fact that on-site wastewater treatment systems, they are treatment systems, they're not disposal systems. But we do call them septic systems. And as this cartoon points out, nothing's ever cheap. The County Health Department, created in 1965. We work by a set of sanitary codes, and those sanitary codes are authorized by the New York State Public Health Law. It gives the County Board of Health the authority to establish and enforce regulations for the security of life and health. The codes are enforced by the Health Department, and some examples would be our septic system program is one. Bathing beaches is another. Our restaurant program is another. We've got a whole host of them. So the health department lives by those codes and enforces the codes, and they give us the authority to do so. An overview of our current septic system program for new home construction. We follow Part 75A to the T for new home construction, that green book. Okay, we go out, our inspectors go out, they do a site evaluation, they do dig a test pit, they do soil percolation tests, they meet with a contractor and sometimes a property owner, and they say, well, what's going to work out here on this site? And they work with the contractor, they design a system that works on that site. All of our inspectors work under the guidance of a professional engineer in our department. He's here tonight, Paul Snyder, or this morning, afternoon.
whatever. And then they install they create the design, they submit the design to our department, we issue a permit, they install the system. During installation, we go out and do the inspection, make sure it's installed per plans, and then we give a final approval. For property transfers, our staff goes and we do water sewage surveys. It's in our sanitary codes that we're required to do water sewage surveys for all property transfers. We'll go out, we'll inspect this, we'll first of all look through the files, and we'll identify what kind of system you've got. Then we will go out and see if there's any wet spots in the absorption field or any place around the house. We'll ultimately do a dye test to see if dye surfaces to the ground. And if it does, then it's a failing system.
Bill, what generates that inspection?
That's by request. But again, it's in the sanitary codes that all property transfers must undergo a water sewage survey. So one of the attorneys, buyer or seller, or usually it's the seller's attorney, coordinates that. And then we have nuisance complaints. Somebody mentioned that earlier. If you live next door to somebody and you know that their septic system's failing, well, you don't want to live next door to a failing septic system. It's it's a public health hazard. You could have your grandkids, kids over, whatever. You could call us. We have the authority under our county sanitary codes to go out and inspect that system and make sure it's working. If it's not, if it's failing, then we require that they replace the system, and there's a certain time frame they have to do so. Then replacement systems, as George said, we operate the same way. We follow Part 75A as close as possible, but on a lot of these systems, they're on small lots. We can't meet the offsets, so we do the best we can. The goals of our septic system design and management program are, first and foremost, protect public health, protect the environment, which is linked to public health. Again, public health, protecting drinking water sources, and avoid nuisance conditions. I went through this already, so I just want to mention through our property transfer program, we inspect between 300 and 400 septic systems per year. And based on the real property system data and assessor data, we have approximately 22,000 septic systems in our county. It was about 10 years ago now, the health department entered into a project to computerize all of our septic system files. It was an expensive project. It took 8 years to do it, completed in 2011. Before we did that, we did not know exactly how many septic system permits we had issued. All of the files were in a file drawer, many file drawers of many cabinets. Once we did computerize all of our files, we also developed a database record for each file, and we linked that database and scanned drawings of all the as-built plans for septic systems to tax parcels. So it's all map-based. It's a geographic information system, and it gives us at our fingertips the information on about 17,000 septic systems in our county. Now remember, we estimate there's 22,000 total. So what about those other 5,000 septic systems? Well, we don't have any record of them. They were either put in before the health department started in 1965, or they were put in illegally, or there is a chance that we've misplaced a few files, but not 5,000 of them. I'm going to move on into really, I think, the meat of this presentation, which is looking at what some other lakes do. And I've been educating myself a little bit on the Finger Lakes, so this is pretty easy. There's Canandaigua Lake, where George is from. Seneca Lake, and correct me if I'm wrong on these, because, okay. Cayuga Lake, and this is Owasco Lake here. This is Skaneateles, thank you. Okay, what's this little one here, George? Atisco, okay. And over here, we have Otsego Lake. So I'm going to talk about programs that Otsego Lake uses, that Keuka Lake uses, and that Owasco Lake uses.
Bill, while you are on that slide, the small lake next to that green arrow is Canandaigua Lake. Left of the green arrow.
Right here.
Yeah,
Oh, Canandaigua Lake, yeah.
That's the
And
other place.
that's the other lake that sponsored workshops like this. This lake isn't one of the Finger Lakes. Its features are very similar, but it actually drains south into the Susquehanna River and into Chesapeake Bay, and then the Finger Lakes all drain north. Cayuga County, that's one of them. It's kind of a rural county. It's similar to Chautauqua County as far as population goes and density. Chautauqua County, for comparison, is about 1,000 square miles. Our population's in the neighborhood of 130,000 people. The Cayuga County Health Department manages their septic system program, and the person that we've corresponded with and talked with quite a bit is Eileen O'Connor. She's their environmental health director at the health department. And I just want to acknowledge her and the others that have provided information for this presentation. In 1994, Cayuga County they revised their sanitary codes to require that all septic systems in the county undergo a mandatory inspection program. And in that, there were special provisions provided for in Owasco Lake and Little Sodus Bay. Little Sodus Bay is connected to Lake Ontario by a channel. So I don't know if they consider it part of Lake Ontario. George, is it?
I'm not sure.
But it's connected with a channel. It's not just a tributary. I believe it is. But we're going to take a closer look at Owasco Lake. Okay, it's 11 miles long, about half to 1 mile wide. It's a deep lake. It's a drinking water source. City of Auburn is located at the north end, and they do have a public sewer system around a portion of that lake. Septic system schedule for, again, mandatory inspection throughout the county. Anything bordering Owasco Lake or Little Sodus Bay, all septic systems that need to be inspected every 2 years, and that means it's lakefront. Any system within 500 feet of the lake has to be inspected every 3 years. Any system in the watershed every 5 years, and any system in the county every 6 years. And what they've done since then, they've combined these two together to make it a little bit easier to manage and track. Let's look at some system locations bordering just Owasco Lake now. We're going to focus on Owasco Lake. They have 729 systems that are on lakefront properties. Within 500 feet of the lake, they have 105 systems. So those would be second-tier properties. Most of the properties, obviously, are lakefront. Within the watershed, there's another 1,300. And then total number of systems throughout the entire watershed is going to be a little over 2,000, 2,200. An interesting fact is that 58% of the septic systems in the watershed had no file in by the county health department. And remember that 58% of systems had no file, and this is all from the State of Owasco Lake report. Let's look at Keuka Lake. Again, it's a rather unusual lake because it's forked like this. It drains to the north. Penyans up here, Branchport, Hammondsport. Again, there are some, there's public sewer around a portion of the lake. It is a drinking water source. It's, I do want to point out, it's transected by, there's two counties, Yates County and Steuben County. Here's the border, and then Yates to the north and Steuben to the south here. Keuka Lake has what's called the Keuka Lake Watershed Improvement Cooperative, or QUIC, which actually manages their septic system program. A person named Paul Botter is the QUIC watershed manager. He would be George Barden's counterpart over at Keuka Lake. Paul also has watershed inspectors working for him. Their program was put together through local municipal law, and between 6 towns and 2 villages, again located in 2 counties, and it was homogenized through intermunicipal agreements. So all of those municipalities enacted the same laws. It's funded by inspection fees, and each one of those municipalities kicks in a chunk of money to support the program. That program requires that all septic systems within 200 feet of the lake be inspected every 5 years. If they identify a substandard system, in other words, a system that has maybe a small septic tank, they increase that frequency to every 3 years. And it impacts over 2,000 systems. The failure rate at Keuka Lake during the first 5-year inspection cycle was 42% of the septic systems failed. Now, those weren't all blatant failures with sewage coming to the ground surface. They were a combination of those, maybe some straight pipes to the lake or a ditch, gray water violations, or undersized septic systems, or septic tanks, excuse me, and a lot of collapsed steel tanks. Let's look at Otsego Lake. 9 miles long, again, a deep lake, again, a drinking water source. All of these lakes that we've looked at today are drinking water sources. Otsego Lake has the Watershed Council, which manages their septic system program. A person named Wynn McIntyre actually was there at the initiation of the program back in 2004, helped design the program based partly on the Keuka Lake model. And then Holly Waterfield, we heard Holly's name earlier today from SUNY Oneonta. SUNY Oneonta has a biological field station on Otsego Lake, so they were obviously closely involved in this and studies of the lake. They actually use watershed rules and regulations for the village of Cooperstown. Cooperstown's down here. Remember, this lake flows south. And watershed rules and regulations, they provide a municipal water, public water supply, the opportunity to enact watershed rules and regulations, and the municipality does it, gets sent on to the county and then to the state, and it gets enacted into state law. And it covers a lot of different things. One of them is septic and sewer, agricultural issues like stockpiling manure, chemical use in the watershed and storage, things like that. Those watershed rules and regulations were modified in 2004 to include this septic system inspection component. It's funded by their program's funded by the village of Cooperstown and through grants. It requires all septic systems within 500 feet of the lake undergo a mandatory inspection period, and all septic systems within 100 feet of a major tributary to be inspected as well every 5 years. That's something that, you know, we're looking at too. I'll get to that in a minute. It impacts a relatively small number of systems, 382. Failure rate at Otsego Lake during the first 5-year inspection cycle, 51% septic systems failed. These are the same photos from the earlier one they were borrowed from Holly Waterfield. Again, a lot of steel tanks that were collapsed or crushed, or baffles missing, the tank, a lot of different things. I do want to point out that at Otsego Lake, check my notes. Otsego Lake, if they do have, Otsego Lake and Keuka Lake are take the same approach to any sewage that's surfacing on the ground surface as we do. They consider that a significant public health risk. That must be corrected immediately. You give immediately means in our county 45 days, about 3 weeks to get to design a system, get a permit from us, and another 3 weeks to install it. And then for as far as substandard systems like a tank, a steel tank that is still operating, but it's going to fail, undoubtedly, is imminent. Otsego Lake gives the homeowner 1 year to correct that, and Keuka Lake gives the homeowner 6 months. All right, let's take a look at Chautauqua Lake. It's about the same size, a lot shallower, but again, it's a drinking water source. Septic systems around the Chautauqua Lake lakeshore between, and we just looked at the Beltway, 394 and 430, from the Beltway into the lake. How many systems are there total based on real property system and assessor data? And how many systems do we have files on and have issued permits for? And as you can see, there's about 937 homes with septic systems around Chautauqua Lake. We have permits on 550 of those, so we've permitted 59% of the systems around the lake. That leaves 41% that we don't know anything about. Remember Cayuga County, 58%, they didn't know anything about. So we're doing a little better than Cayuga County was. And that you know, not knowing what's in 41% in our case, what kind of system is it? What size tank do they have? What kind of tank? You know, these are systems, again, that were put in either before 1965 when the health department started, or put in illegally, or there might be a few that we've misplaced records for. But as you've heard from other speakers today who've worked around lakes, that's a significant number of systems. Could be a significant public health issue. If we look at the TMDL report, which only looked at the number of systems within 50 feet of the lake, in other words, lakeshore lots, and then the number of systems within 250 feet of the lake, you see there's 261 septic systems within 50 feet of the lake. There's about 300 systems then between 50 feet of the lake and 250 feet of the lake, for a total of 560. And the reason the TMDL looked at that is because this is what was considered, where the phosphorus was coming from septic systems to the lake. So the TMDL didn't look at any systems that were beyond 250 feet from the lake shore. It only looked at those systems within 250 feet, and it assumed that those systems within 50 feet, 100% of those systems were what they considered short-circuiting, were contributing a significant amount of phosphorus to the lake. The systems between 50 and 250 feet were considered as 60% of those being short-circuited. So still contributing a significant amount of phosphorus, but some of them were probably working okay. And that's just, you know, an assumption they used in their computer modeling. Our problems are the same kinds of problems George has out at Canandaigua Lake. We have small lots. We have inadequate offsets from the lake. We've got a lot of systems that are in people's front yards between their cottage and the lake, close to, you know, it's with very little elevation change, very close to between the top of the ground surface and the lake level, so we can't get adequate separation distances between the trenches, any trench that might be the bottom of the trench, and the groundwater table. Groundwater table, we're assuming, is lake level. Groundwater is going to flow towards the lake. So we've got some serious issues there. We've got other issues with drinking water wells. All of the areas around Chautauqua Lake that have private septic also have private drinking water wells. And we cannot meet, in most instances, we cannot meet those offsets of either 100 feet or, let's look at this a little closer. This is from the New York State Department of Health standards for water well drilling. 100 feet is minimum, but for a system where you have a well down gradient of a septic system, you got to be 200 feet away. Or if you're in coarse gravel, you got to be 200 feet away. And it's very difficult to meet those. We have a hard time meeting that for new development on a 1 acre lot, let alone a small lakefront lot that might be 50 by 100. And again, we have to look at not only the water well of the person that we're dealing with, either replacing the system or what have you, but we also have to look at their neighbors' water wells.
Bill, quick question. What do you guys find, is anybody looking at the water, at the private wells and
We actually, when we do water sewage surveys, that's the one half of our inspection is looking at water wells. So for all property transfers, we're doing that to make sure the water wells are constructed properly, and they're free from contamination. There's no obvious signs of contamination. They've got good caps that meet health department standards, and we test the water quality for bacteria as well. But that's
Finding a lot of problems there?
pretty much every water sewage survey we do needs some upgrade, whether it's a new cap. Some wells are in pits. Pits aren't allowed, so we want to get that well up out of the pit filled in. So we always see some sort of problem, and that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually have some statistics on our water sewage survey program from our not just water sewage survey program, but the county health department has a private laboratory. We test for bacteria. And that's where when we go out and do a water sewage survey, we'll sample someone's well, bring it to our lab, test for bacteria. Also, private individuals can bring in samples and have them run for bacteria. And we had a college intern that did a project for us about in the mid-2000s, around 2005. She looked at 4 years of data that was available. And of the private wells that were sampled in that beltway area that's on private septic, we had 241 wells that were sampled. Of those, 31% were positive for total coliform bacteria, and 7% were positive for E. coli bacteria. So it's an issue. Some of those wells were able to be cleared up by a simple well disinfection with a bleach solution. And some of those wells could not be cleared up, so they had to install some sort of treatment, disinfection treatment. And I'll leave you with this quote from Abe Lincoln about planning. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. Smart planning is going to help protect public health. It's going to help protect the lake, and it's going to help turn the lake around and make it at least stabilize what we have.